Good afternoon and welcome to Gateway Foundation's virtual panel on problem gambling. If this is your first time joining us, we appreciate you listening and watching. I have three distinguished gentlemen with me today who will be engaging in a productive and lively discussion on this important topic. March is Problem Gambling Awareness Month. Gateway Foundation has been around for 53 years, but we've only been doing problem gambling services for the last two. So we are excited to be going into the space, into this much needed area with other providers, also meeting the needs of people with problem gambling disorder. As we close out Problem Gambling Awareness Month, we wanted to, first of all, talk in general about what problem gambling is and make sure that people understand that it is a disease of the brain like any other addiction. But today we're really going to focus on sports betting. A few facts just to set the context for today's conversation. The market for legalized sports betting in the U.S. exploded in 2021, doubling in size as Americans wagered more than $52 billion throughout the year, according to a report from the Morning Consult, a data intelligence company, and as reported by Fortune magazine in January 2022. In Illinois alone, sports betting accounted for $7 billion wagered during 2021. Those numbers are staggering, and of course, reminding everyone that in 2021, we were still with restricted isolation in some degree because of the pandemic. So this problem, I think, is exacerbated by this. So today, we have three wonderful, very educated gentlemen, strapping gentlemen with me. I'm going to have each of them to introduce themselves and share a little bit about why they do the work that they do, what their role is in this industry, and then we'll jump into questions. So, Marcus, would you like to start, please?
Sure. Thank you, Teresa, and happy to be here. My name is Marcus Fruchter. I'm the administrator of the Illinois Gaming Board, and I think my perspective is a little bit different than Dan and Keith. So I'll give a little bit of an explanation for background about what the Illinois Gaming Board does for some context for our discussion later on. So the Illinois Gaming Board was established in 1990, and we are the regulatory and law enforcement agency in the state of Illinois who is responsible for regulating and overseeing all legalized gaming in the state in order to generate tax revenue for the state and for the local host communities. We are a civilian and sworn agency, which means we have employees who are both civilians and sworn law enforcement officers. We do things like issue gaming licenses, conduct background and regulatory investigations, do financial audits of licensees and applicants, enforce the gaming laws and rules. We initiate discipline, engage in rulemaking, and do other similar regulatory activities. There are three types of legalized gambling in Illinois. Casino gambling, which was legalized in 1990. Video gaming, or the video slot machines that are throughout the state other than in the city of Chicago, which were legalized in 2009 and launched in 2012. And then our newest addition to gaming offerings in the state is sports wagering, which launched in 2020, both online and at retail locations, at casinos, at racetracks, and eventually at sports stadiums in the state. Our mission is to safeguard the integrity and safety of Illinois gaming and to make sure that gaming, once authorized and permitted by the General Assembly and the executive branch, is conducted in a way that's transparent, compliant, and ethical. And that includes, among other things, working with licensees and stakeholders like yourselves to encourage responsible gaming, addressing problem gambling head on, and ensuring that those who need help get the support, resources, and services they need and deserve, and can get it without stigmatization and undue hassles that would be a barrier to recovery and to continuing on the path of recovery. That is why, among other things, in 2002, in fact, it's going to celebrate its 20th anniversary in July of 2022, the Gaming Board established its self-exclusion program for casino gambling, and in 2020, we incorporated sports wagering into our self-exclusion program. We have 28 enrollment sites across Illinois and a dedicated full-time self-exclusion program director. And this program allows individuals on a voluntary basis to exclude themselves from either casino wagering and sports wagering. There's more information about our self-exclusion program on the IGB website, along with additional information and resources for people that are interested in responsible gambling and, of course, getting help and services for problem gambling. And that also includes links to the Illinois Department of Human Resources, which provide a great array of services, and the Illinois State's gaming hotline. And if you don't mind, Teresa, if you can indulge me for one more minute, I just want to make sure that I provide that information out there in case anyone who's listening and they might want to access those resources. So we have it available by text, website, and telephone. You can go to weknowthefeeling.org. You can call 1-800-GAMBLER, or you can text ILGAMB to 53342. So that's a little bit about me and our agency. Really look forward to talking with everyone and learning from Keith and from Dan and from you, Teresa. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. And I think we just put it there for everybody to see. And you can also call Gateway because we now offer gambling services and we can do an intake right away. So I'm going to ask Dan to introduce himself and tell us a little bit also about his organization and why he is committed and doing this work.
Sure. Thank you very much, Teresa, and Marcus and Keith. Always good to see you as well. I was previously the assistant director in New Jersey. I live in New Jersey, and I was the assistant director for the state affiliate 800 Gambler, the Council on Compulsive Gambling of New Jersey, for about 6 years. And during that time, I had the privilege to conduct education, prevention, awareness around the harms of gambling. Now, not everyone experiences gambling-related harm. We understand that. But the statistics, as Keith knows very well, and as we always talk about, there's going to be a small percentage of the population that experiences gambling harm. So when we have the privilege to work with regulators, enforcement, the leagues, older adults, senior centers, schools, it doesn't matter who we work with. We want to educate people that gambling should be treated as a form of entertainment, just like going to the movies, just like going out to dinner. But for some people, they'll start to experience these feelings that they can't describe. The feelings of needing to go back sooner than they expected, the feeling of wanting to feel alive, the feeling of needing to escape an issue or a problem that they don't quite know how to deal with, so they'll spend a few hours gambling. I joined Epic Risk Management August of last year because it affords me the opportunity to travel the country working with athletes, financial services institutions, states, regulators, and enforcement officials, talking about my lived experience. Because the reason I do the work that I do is because I'm a person in recovery over 12 years from gambling addiction. Gambling created harm in my life. Doesn't mean I'm anti-gambling. I'm simply anti-gambling for me. I know I don't have a healthy relationship with it, so I do not do it. However, when we talk with other people and speak around the country, we do talk about the ability to gamble responsibly, where to go for help if you or a loved one or a family member has a problem. And it's important that we highlight those resources because what we've seen since 2018 is the expansion of gambling, sports betting in particular, which is why we're here. And Teresa, you talked about some of the numbers at the Open. We are seeing staggering amounts of money being wagered. The handle is just clearly rising and growing month over month, year over year. And at Epic Risk Management, our goal is to reduce gambling-related harms amongst the populations we deal with. I think it's important that we highlight to people listening today and in the days, months, and weeks to come, we're not just gambling with numbers here. We're not just gambling with dollar figures. We're gambling with lives. And we always want to recognize that the impact of gambling addiction, just like substance use, is felt far and wide amongst family, amongst loved ones, and amongst friends. So it's important to educate those 8, 10, 12, 20 people that might be in a gambler's life to let them know what those warning signs might look like, where to go for help, how to sign up for self-exclusion, where the national helpline or the local state helplines might be, and what educational resources are available. That's why I do the work that I do, because I just have a passion for prevention, have a passion for connecting people with resources that will help to promote a sustainable and meaningful long-term recovery.
Thank you, Dan. And last but not least, Keith.
Thanks, Teresa. Again, thanks to Gateway for putting this webinar together. I know we'll get into it in just a moment, but as a little bit of background, as you said, March is Problem Gambling Awareness Month, and the National Council on Problem Gambling, we created this 19 years ago as a means of, one, raising public awareness about gambling addiction, and two, encouraging healthcare providers and others to screen. So it's awareness and screening. We like to say that it's have the conversation in March, and that's what we're doing here today. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. My background, I've been with the National Council now over 20 years, and a little bit about us for those who don't know. The National Council on Problem Gambling, we're the national advocates for programs and services for problem gamblers and their families. And we do this we work on a lot of responsible gambling issues. We also work on a lot of problem gambling issues. And we have a number of members across the country, including state affiliate chapters. And as Dan mentioned, he worked at our New Jersey chapter. Organizational members, which include, but are not limited to, members of the gambling industry, and then individual members as well, which include a lot of counselors, researchers, and then individuals in recovery. So we like to think of ourselves as sort of a one-stop shop. If you have a question or problem or issue with gambling, either problem gambling or responsible gambling, come to us and we'll help get you to where you need to be, whether it's to an intake, if you're in Illinois, an intake there at Gateway, if it's prevention and training education, that Dan's organization runs, or whether it's to Marcus to self-exclude on a statewide basis, or for questions about jackpots and regulations and other things like that. So we're neutral on legalized gambling. We want to be that hub of the wheel, and sports betting has profoundly impacted, I think, what we do. This is the largest and fastest expansion of gambling in our nation's history. And as both you and Dan said, it's going to have an impact on problem gambling. In 2018, the board of directors of the National Council said that the expansion of sports betting, absent significant increased funding for prevention and treatment of gambling problems, will increase the rate and severity of gambling addiction across the United States. It's too early to tell yet, but I can tell you that when we look at risk factors for gambling problems, we did a large survey of 28,000 Americans in 2018, another similar survey with the same exact questions in 2021. Risk factors for gambling addiction have increased by 50% in these past 3 years. Of course, this was both the expansion mainly of sports betting, but it was also the impact of the pandemic, and untangling those is going to be a little bit difficult. But as we move into this penultimate day of Problem Gambling Awareness Month, as we move into this discussion of sports betting, I think that's one thing to keep in mind, is that there is no question, at least in our minds, that risk has increased, and risk has increased significantly. And that when you look at where that risk is, it's not evenly distributed across the general population. That risk is primarily increased among young male sports bettors. So I'll leave that here for our further discussion, but we think that there is a lot to talk about as we move into this discussion of sports betting. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Somebody just put a question that we're going to address in just a moment, but one of the things that is really clear from listening to the three of you is that gambling disorder, we want to make sure that people understand it's a disease and that we are treating it in that way. And in order to do that, we have to work with partners. And you all mentioned the partners that we have in the community. I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Bill Johnson from the Illinois Council on Problem Gambling, who was our partner and helped put this panel together. So thank you, Bill, if you're listening. Connie is asking about any hotlines in Texas around gambling. And I don't know of any in Texas per se, but if you call Gateway at our number, which I will give, it's 844-975-DONE. We can help you and get you to the right place. Again, 844-97. Sorry, go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, we do cover Texas, so I can tell you and anybody on this webinar, if you're anywhere in the United States, the national helpline is available, and it will direct you to resources in your area. So if you called the national number from Illinois, you'd be directed to a call center that handles Illinois calls. So Connie, in Texas, if you call, text, or chat to 800-522-4700, you will get referrals to resources available in Texas. Unfortunately, just so you know, Texas has no public funding for problem gambling programs. So the resources on the ground there are going to be thin. We'll get you everything that we can get. It's going to be a lot of referrals to GA, and that meeting might be a couple hours away. It's going to be a lot of online self-help resources. There's counselors in other states, but that's something that people have to know. As sports betting becomes a national issue, the amount of help available on the ground differs radically state by state. And there are, if you think of the whole United States as now being in the range of sports betting advertising, the safety net that underlies all that advertising, the problem gambling safety net, is uneven and in some cases absent. And Texas is a great example. It's no surprise that someone's reaching out for help in Texas, because the great state of Texas, they sell $4 billion worth of lottery tickets a year. They make $2 billion a year off the lottery, and that is a state agency. They put not a single penny of that money back into prevention, treatment, education, research. So we'll do everything we can to get you the help you need. But as you said, Teresa, there's got to be a lot of partners in this. And unfortunately, we don't have many in Texas. So
I guess.
it changes state by state. In Illinois, you're evolving to a better, more comprehensive statewide system. And that's what's going to be critical as sports betting expands everywhere.
So let's switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about these recent partnerships. So both Dan and Keith, and of course, Marcus, you can jump in as well. But Dan, I know that Epic and the NCAA launched a partnership this past month. Why is this important to the NCAA, and what role does Epic play?
Sure. As we know, when PASPA was repealed in 2018, it allowed each state to decide how to legalize, regulate, enforce, and set the parameters for sports betting within their unique states. I think what the NCAA quickly realized, and this actually was formally announced at the end of January in a press release, was that we need to stay ahead of this. If we're going to start seeing states legalizing sports betting, the very sport that our student athletes are putting on the court, on the field, in the ice hockey rink, wherever it may be, on the baseball diamond, we need to provide some education and awareness to our student athletes. Number one, to provide education, obviously, but also to promote integrity and to keep the integrity of the game safe. Because one of the largest concerns and biggest concerns, whether it's pro sport or amateur sport, and Keith can piggyback on this as well, is the concern over that front page news item, the concern over the Calvin Ridleys, the Evander Kanes from the NHL. When we have situations, go back to Arizona State in '89 when you had point shaving scandal. We want to avoid and stay out of the crosshairs. So let's get ahead of this and start promoting educational and awareness sessions to our student athletes. This has been an interesting time, Teresa, because you have simultaneous to this NIL deals that are starting to be formed state by state, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, and college by college. They differ in terms of what's able to be done and what's not. We're starting to see student athletes benefiting from that with respect to gambling operators partnering in social media accounts. We're seeing our sportsbook operators partnering with certain large universities like LSU and Caesars and Colorado and PointsBet, to name a couple. So this is the time to provide education, to let the student athlete know, hey, listen, you're at an elevated risk of harm because of certain personality traits, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, lends itself to being at risk for developing addiction, but also to let them know where the help is, where the resources are. We've been tremendously oversubscribed for the first year with the NCAA. We're receiving tremendous feedback. We're receiving a lot of requests from the colleges and universities to come out to the campuses to talk to the student athletes, the administrators, the staff, and the coaches, so that we can start to tackle this thing on a state-by-state basis. It's a monumental task, but it's one that we're blessed with the opportunity to have. And what makes the program a bit unique is the sense that we get to share our lived experience. Each facilitator has a journey with gambling in their life, and they played sport or played in the public eye at a high level. And so they really resonate and connects with the competitive student athlete.
And I'm glad that we're talking to students. We talk to student athletes about not taking enhancement drugs. We talk to them about, make sure that you celebrate responsibly after you win the NCAA or whatever, but we don't talk to them about this. So it should be in the same par. Keith, you recently received NCPG received their largest grant in history, $6.2 million from the NFL last year. How did that partnership come about, and what are you going to do with all that money?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we're really lucky to be here. I'd like to say it's the result of it's 50 years of work on behalf of the National Council. I was just lucky enough to be here at the time when the ship finally came in. But we started our engagement with NFL decades ago, and they have been a member of the National Council for more than a decade. And they recognized, I think, a long time ago, as Dan said, concerns about integrity of the game, gambling-related problems being a problem, but mainly in terms of fixing. And so over the years, as we've engaged with them, and in the work that Epic's doing as well, is to try and help get the sense to the leagues and the colleges that alongside in protecting the integrity of the game is protecting the health and wellness of these athletes. And so the more and more we engage with the NFL, the more and more they started to see gambling not just as a security issue, and integrity of the game is all about security, also as a health and wellness issue, which is a much different lens to look through. It's a lens much closer to Gateway's lens: therapeutic, treatment, prevention. Obviously preventing it before a problem before it starts, and then making sure that athletes who have problems can get help. So as we continue to engage with the NFL, they became a bigger and stronger supporter of the National Council, which led up to this invitation to do this grant proposal. What the grant is going to do over the next 3 years is three things in particular. One, we're going to modernize that safety net. So we're putting a lot of money over the next 3 years into specifically the helpline, but a lot of things that are related to the helpline, making sure that people like Connie in Texas are going to get access to as many resources as we can from the national level, and that we can do a better job of handing people off to providers at the state level. So helpline modernization is one big bucket. It's really the safety net. It's a shame that in 2021, we still have to spend a lot of time and energy modernizing the safety net, that somehow in the last 40 or 50 years of legalized gambling in the United States, we hadn't got around to that yet, but we're going to get there. The second major pinnacle is public awareness. And so we built for NFL, but everybody can use it, responsibleplay.org. That was a website that was intended to be for people who don't have gambling problems. And it's a much more neutral message. And the NFL was glad to be able to put that into their commercial that reached millions of viewers. It ran all during the football season. I hope a lot of people saw it with Steve Mariucci, former NFL coach. And it was the NFL's brand and logo alongside ours, directing people, if you're going to gamble, go to responsibleplay.org. Because there's still a lot of people, quite frankly, that don't want to go to the website of the National Council on Problem Gambling. It's just, and again, gambling addiction, it's a negative. We get it, even though we see it we see recovery as positive. So we built that. We're going to go on air with the PSA before the end of the year. It will be the National Council's first TV PSA, and there's some other public awareness initiatives. And then last but not least, and I think to the interest of everybody on this webinar, we're putting a third of that money roughly into the first ever national grants for youth gambling prevention. We just finished the first round of these grants. We're going to do another round this fall, and that will provide opportunities for people that are doing youth gambling prevention. And we're going to try and build up the field, because you have to start somewhere. And as we all know, if you have to pick a place to start, you can pick treatment, you can pick training, you can pick helpline, but picking youth prevention especially might have the biggest knock-on effects down the road. And it's startling that in the history of the United States, this is, as far as we know, the first ever national grant program for youth gambling prevention. So we're going to put a lot of that money back into the field. We hope to create a lot of model programs. If we're announcing today, I wish I could say more, but one of the awardees is a close partner of the Illinois Council and of Gateway that works there in Cook County, Chicago. I'm eager to be able to say more. We can't quite yet, but Chicagoland area has a awardee for these first ever national youth.
I hope it's who I think it is. So Marcus, you talked a little bit about these self-exclusion programs, and how people can go and be self-excluded from a casino. But what is the parallel, or what can people do if they want to be self-excluded from sports betting?
Sure. That's a great question. And before I answer that, let me just say a couple of things in response to what Keith and Dan shared. First, as a regulator, I think it's really helpful and great to hear discussions and developments about collaboration between that they just discussed, partnerships with folks in the industry, in the sports industry, and the gambling industry. And I think generally the more discussion about awareness and sharing resources and sharing information helps to promote the kind of environment that we're working for, which again is one that's compliant, transparent, safe, and operates with ethics. And I think everything that those kind of partnerships do to help educate and allow people to understand how they can do things responsibly, if they can't do something responsibly, where they can get help and how they can set limits. So I think that's a great segue to go into your question. And the casino self-exclusion program, as I said, soon be celebrating its 20th anniversary. When sports wagering was legalized in Illinois in 2019, and then we launched in March of 2020, I don't think we could have picked a worse time for the sports calendar. But nonetheless, that program is now incorporated into our self-exclusion program. So if you enroll in the casino self-exclusion program, you are then excluded from participating in sports wagering, either in a retail context or in a online context. We have both online and retail sports wagering in Illinois. Additionally, our sports wagering rules, which are available on our website, and if someone has insomnia or otherwise interested, I'd invite you to look at those. But of particular note is Rule 1250, and that's a rule that mandates sports wagering online operators to give patrons the options to set gambling restrictions within their own accounts. If they want to limit their exposure to certain kind of marketing and advertising, they can do that. If they want to put limits on how much they can wager and other kinds of things. So that's another tool to help people enjoy it within whatever is most comfortable and most appropriate for themselves and their families. The final thing I want to say, to go back to what Keith opened with, and not to pick on Texas, but to draw a distinction at least and promote some of the good work that we're doing here in Illinois. Prior to the 2019 gaming expansion law, which I think was the largest expansion of gaming in Illinois since the Riverboat Gambling Act in 1990 that brought casino gambling here, that expanded the number of casinos, brought sports wagering to Illinois, and expanded our video gaming opportunities, and probably one of the largest single expansions in U.S. history. But prior to that, annual funding to the Department of Human Services for their gambling, responsible gambling and problem gambling efforts was under $1 million, and usually close to about $500,000 or $600,000 per year. As part of that act, Governor Pritzker and the General Assembly recognized that if you're going to expand gaming, you have to also expand help and opportunities for problem gambling and responsible gambling. And so beginning with that law that was enacted in 2019, resources to the funding, annual appropriations to the Department of Human Services, went up to $6.8 million per year. So that's my rough math, that's about a 500 or 600% increase on an annual appropriated basis. And additionally, in the governor's FY23 budget, that funding level has been raised $3.2 million to $10 million. So we realize that it takes a lot of different things to have a successful and robust gambling market in Illinois, which is what we want. But we also want to make sure that we're doing the right thing on the other side of the ledger for education, recovery, and responsible gambling.
It's awesome. And Marcus, let me just one thing real quick. Dan and I talk about this all the time. The requirement that operators allow people to have these responsible gaming tools, and especially the limit setting features, is fantastic, and that is something that should be applauded and should be in every jurisdiction. What the next step, I think, is to make sure that consumers are advertised and frankly incentivized to use them, because to date the uptick of usage is paltry. Even if you can find these tools, you really have to know where to know about them. Blah 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 blah. The uptick rate is less than 1%, of customers. And when you look at people that are most at risk, they tend to use those tools the most. So the next step. This is not an IGB problem. This is an operator problem, or it's a partnership opportunity, as we like to say.
Right. I like that.
Yeah, there's a great opportunity for IGB, NCPG, Epic, Illinois Council, the operators themselves to all get together and say, look, these tools are available, use them. Maybe you get a $5 coupon. Maybe you get a loyalty thing. The industry is giving away thousands of dollars in risk-free bets. Let's give away $50 in something tangible to get gamblers to use those tools. Or, frankly, no one's preventing, as far as I know, would IGB prevent an operator from saying, look, this tool is not an opt-in, it's an opt-out. I don't think you would tell any of your operators, no, you can't encourage people to use these tools. So there's a lot of space between your regulatory requirement that the responsible gambling tools are there, and ensuring that the majority of your customers, especially your high risk customers, not only are aware of them, use them, and then are even incentivized to use them. So I think this is where responsible gambling is going to go. The compliance part is great, and I'm glad they're compliant. I'm glad they have these tools available, but they won't have much impact until we brand them and we make the same effort that they spend to, if they're spending a couple $1,000s to get a new customer, spend a couple dollars to make them a sustainable customer. That I think that's where that's the next step in responsible gambling. Dan, I don't know.
So I think, I think one of the things that is impacting too is the stigma and the misunderstanding of this as a disease. And so, you said here's, when we talk about here's the bar. This is what we have to do, but let's take it a level higher, right? When the ADA says you have to have doors this wide, but if you create things that are universally designed, they help everybody and it's better. So when we talk about this, we should also be thinking about that. And the more we talk about it, the less stigma. So Dan, you work specifically with athletes, amateur and professionals, and you talk a little bit about sort of the risks. Is a difference between amateur athletes and professional athletes, and give us a little bit of that perspective. There's a little bit of background noise coming from you, but I'm not sure what that is. So
let me see. Hold on one second. Let me. Let me move myself. No, I'm still here. I'm moving myself because we can to a different spot away from the background noise.
Well, he does that. I can talk a little bit about risk. And
there you go.
Reset yourself, or are you good?
I'm good.
Okay, awesome. That's great.
And so, and thank you for that question, because we note that there are certain differences between, say, an athlete and a non-athlete. There's various personality traits, there's risk factors. So not just between professional sport and amateur, but between just amateur/professional and non-athlete. And some of those personality traits, because I've experienced the same thing in my life. As someone who played baseball at a high level that was being scouted by professional, the Phillies and the Reds. I mean, some people consider them Major League Baseball teams. I'm a Yankee guy. I don't.
That's awesome.
And as well as some Division I schools, there were certain traits within me that I see in other athletes. And that's that competitive nature. It's the winning mentality. It's the comfort level around risk. One of the things that's interesting about competition and winning mentality, the ego drives that. And I don't know when to stop is oftentimes what we hear from a competitive athlete, because what's gotten me to the point that I'm successful so far has been that drive, that determination, that spirit of no quit attitude. And that is hard to abandon on the court or on the field. It follows you throughout your everyday life, throughout your day-to-day comings and goings. So we see those as some particular behavioral characteristics. We also start seeing other interesting aspects when you're around and socializing around people who make gambling conversation part of the norm. You're in a social group, you're talking about it. What's the harm, right? And you hear this a lot, especially from student athletes. What's the harm? It's really not even gambling. I'm just playing. And the word gambling is very interesting as we move into this decade and season of gambling expansion. Gambling is something my uncle did. It's something my grandfather did. I don't gamble. I bet, I play. I'm a smart money manager. I'm educated. I know what I'm doing here, because when you have online gambling expansion with sports betting, it allows a person to not just bet pitch by pitch or quarter by quarter, but also cash out if their bet's not going their way and reopen a bet another way. So you have that constant brain activation, if we will, right? The anticipation, the participation, not just the winning. And college students are so comfortable on technology. And so when you're with a big peer, a large group of people, and you're spending a lot of time talking about this, you can start to find yourself developing certain habits. On top of that, we tend to see the difference between professional and amateur. Gambling is an emotional issue, and we know it's not a money problem, but money problems do result. And when you have a professional athlete who comes into a new lifestyle of big money, glamour, fame, fortune, in a very unstable job market. Let's be honest, pro sport is an unstable job market, highly competitive. Your job is always in demand. The next person up wants to take your position because that's a contract or that's notoriety. So there's a lot of pressure that goes on. And we oftentimes will see and hear people say, I don't have a gambling problem. I have a life problem. I don't know how to deal with life. And so I use gambling as a coping mechanism. I use gambling, alcohol, drugs as a way to escape. And that's where we start thinking about, what is really going on at the deeper level, right? What is the disease? And if you break up the word disease, you get dis-ease. What is not at ease within me that I'm now choosing and have to start going down this path of making certain lifestyle choices? So that's a little bit about what we see and why we speak to student athletes and even pro sport, because they're in the public, they have access, so accessibility matters. It's available. They're in social settings, and they have that competitive winning mentality.
Keith, I know that you wanted to jump in there as well.
Oh no, I mean, again, everything Dan said and his background is really helpful in understanding that. We say it's trite, but I think probably true. Most of the traits that make you a great or an elite athlete make you a really bad gambler. And not again, most athletes will never develop problems, but those who do can really develop problems. I think the thing too that's interesting is that sports betting is still perceived as a game of skill. And the closer you are to the game, as Dan said, the less it feels like a gamble and more like an investment. Especially if you're betting on your own sport or people in the sport, or you've just scouted this team and you think the line's wrong. You think you've got an advantage. Knowing more about the game than anybody else possibly on the planet. I can't even imagine how difficult it would be not to bet on that game in your own sport. So I think there's a lot there within the sport specific mindset that is fascinating to unpack. Of course, many of those same traits can also help in recovery. That persistence, so there's a lot there. The last thing I'd like to say, though, Teresa, is that when we look at the expansion of sports betting, one thing that is a big question in our field, and it is still, I think, an open question, is are sports gamblers, and especially sports gamblers with problems, are they different from other gamblers? And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that no, gambling is gambling is gambling, and as Dan said, it's what's deep inside you. But as we look at participation, if you draw the lens back a little bit, throughout the history of the United States and around the world, education and income skew negatively with gambling participation. So the more educated you are, the more money you make, the less likely you are to gamble on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, except for sports. Our studies show between 2018 and 2021 that the higher your education income, the more likely you are to bet sports. To the extent that in both the 2018 and the 2021 surveys, which combined surveyed almost 30,000 Americans, college graduates bet sports at a rate twice that of a high school graduate. Now, I think there's something there about the role of college student athletics. I think there's something there so I think that lends me to think that maybe this new generation of sports bettors is different. They're approaching gambling in different ways. They've got different risk factors and especially if they think it's a game of skill, if it's something they grew with, maybe their treatment implications won't be that different. But from a public policy approach, this is a different high risk population than we've dealt with before, with different reasons to gamble and possibly different consequences.
Marcus, are you seeing any of this from your perspective?
I'm not really in a good position to comment on that. As a regulator, we don't, forecast trends or do those kinds of market studies. So I think my reaction is that's really interesting. I think as following the Supreme Court's ruling in sports wagering rolls out beyond Las Vegas and Nevada, I think that's something that'll be watched. But I can't say anything intelligent or helpful beyond that one way or the other.
I just want to add two additional points there to piggyback on Keith. It is a different type of gambling. When you talk about internet mobile device gambling versus the old brick and mortar style where you're betting on sports, you're waiting 3 hours for the outcome, right? There's that time delay of the reward. And now you're getting that reward reinforced every 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute. So there's something to be said about that participation rate and the velocity and speed of play. It's also the marketing. As marketing has expanded, it's changed the shape of what gambling looks and feels like, skill-based versus gambling. And also the concern from the leagues that's really been echoed loudly has been the threat of inside information compromising the integrity. College athletics, the injury reports are not robust. You're not going to get a really full-blown college injury report. But if someone on campus sees someone injured and hobbled and the starting quarterback is not playing, that individual might have a connection somewhere, either legally or illegally. And that's a concern as sports betting grows. The use of inside information and compromising the integrity of the game.
In the way that sports betting is likely to spin out in America is the last point, Teresa. Dan talked about it a little bit, but the role of in-play betting. Traditional sports betting in America has been outcome of the game. And sometimes you would bet on Tuesday for the Sunday games. You'd have these huge intervals. As Dan said, that is being compressed already to where we see about half, 45 to 50% of bets on sports in America are now in play. And it's 75 to 80% overseas. But what I would suggest to you is that you haven't seen anything yet, because the way American sports are designed, particularly baseball, and football, there's intervals between the play, between each pitch, between each down, that allow the recalculation of right now dozens of propositions on a play, soon to be hundreds of propositions, and potentially thousands of propositions each play you could bet, because anything that can be monitored and measured will be monetized and made into a market. And by that, I mean, we're looking at individual player performance, not just whether or not Dan threw a strike on this particular at bat, but how fast the
Right.
ball traveled. You will be able to do an under over on that. I think he's tired now. It's the fifth inning. I think it's more likely to be under 80 miles an hour than not. That level of granularity is something that nobody else in the world does, because most other sports aren't even built like ours, nor has anybody had the technology, nor the market access. But that's where our bookmakers, our data providers, and our leagues and clubs are all going. And nobody has any idea of the impact, as Dan said, on potential integrity of the game issues. Because if and if Dan tells someone that on the fifth pitch of the 10th inning, he's going to throw a 78-mile-an-hour fastball, how could you possibly detect that fix is in? Because his friends and family are betting on the under. So anyway, I'm not as concerned about integrity of the game. I am concerned about the impact on gambling addiction, on having thousands of bettable propositions, a play, and someone that's auto betting even a dozen of those. You can have, I mean, it's random, and B, it's incredible. It's associated with incredibly high rates of gambling problems.
So we have 10 minutes left, and we've talked a lot about sports betting and online sports betting. But as we close out, and I don't know if I don't see any more questions from our audience, but here's a question. Do we lose clients from both general population and our SA programs and corrections from sport gambling? I see. Okay, so security places, the restricted housing, the transfers. Again, kind of sort of the challenges of no treatment options, and wondering how we can specifically look at this for our corrections population, which is a great question, right? Because gambling happens all the time, right? Like you're playing cards outside and you're gambling. I mean, it's a very old concept that we've been sort of grown up with, and I think one of the biggest challenges is educating about just betting at home with your kids on pennies or whatever is gambling, and what is the message that we send. So one of the things I wanted to, and there's a lot of stigma around it, right? People don't understand it. So as we close, I wanted each of you to kind of, if you had to send a message to people out there, right? So I think we've shared a lot of information about how big this problem could get. The last comments that Keith made, I hadn't even thought about that, right? How fast can the ball go? Where is it going to go, to the left, to the right? I don't even know. So it's very dangerous. And I think, and I say this every time I have an opportunity, that suicide is 5 times higher among people with a gambling disorder. So now if you think about the thousands more that have now started gambling that maybe weren't before, it really is frightening what could happen and how many people could lose loved ones or lose their lifestyle. So I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to just kind of, what's your last message for our audience? What do you want people to walk away with as we close out this panel? Marcus, would you like to start?
Sure. Yes. First of all, I want to thank you again, Teresa, and thank you to Dan and to Keith for this discussion. I think that my takeaway in the couple of seconds that I have to formulate it is that first, for the small amount of folks that have problems with gambling, I think they should know that there is help and resources out there, and definitely to echo the comments that have been made about reducing the stigma of looking for help and getting help. So as a regulator, again, we want to have a successful, compliant, ethical gambling market. And part of that is making sure that our licensees, applicants follow all the rules with respect to integrity, but also that we provide resources and awareness to help encourage responsible gambling and problem gambling. And then finally, I want to echo the same message that everyone has been saying, is that if you need help, there's lots of resources available, and please reach out and ask for it. And lots of people are there. The Illinois Department of Human Services, the Illinois Council on Problem Gambling, all of the great organizations represented here and across the United States.
Thank you, Marcus. Dan?
Yeah, gambling addiction is that hidden addiction. You don't see it. There's no positive urine stream. You're not gonna get up. Someone's not gonna pee dice if you give them a urine screen for gambling addiction, as we always say. And so it's important, if we're working with folks in recovery from substance use disorder, that we ask questions. We screen properly. Within Problem Gambling Awareness Month is Problem Gambling Screening Day, and that occurs one day. And it's a time that we encourage clinicians to screen for gambling problems, because we don't ask the question. It's whether it's taboo, whether it's socially acceptable. Perhaps we don't know the right questions to ask. And it's always a simple conversation. You can go on your state local affiliate chapter's website or the NCPG's website, and you'll be able to find the resources in order to help have that conversation. So it's important that we recognize this is an emotional issue. It has nothing to do about a person being greedy or just being able to stop. It's an addiction, and it needs to be treated as such. It needs to be managed on a daily basis. It needs to have a care plan. It needs to be reviewed every 90 days. And it needs to be taken in the context of the person's life, as well as the family members and loved ones. Let's never forget about those that are impacted by the life and by the, what happens with a person who struggles with a gambling problem or addiction. They need support services as well. And I'm always very careful with my language. It's a person first. It's a person who struggles with an addiction. We want to mention this a lot, stigma and shame, because, a gambler historically could be called a degenerate. There was a point in my life where I was called a degenerate. It doesn't make you feel very good. And it actually leads a person to not want to pick up that phone or talk about how they're feeling or what they're experiencing. So it's important that we treat this as an addiction, that we treat people with respect, with compassion, with empathy, and that if we do have someone in our life that's struggling with a gambling addiction, know the resources. You can't make a person get help. They're going to decide when the time is right for them through a sequence of events, or maybe it's a point in time. But when they do come to you, if someone were to come to Keith, what do? I need help. Keith's not going to say, I don't know, I'm not really sure yet. He would have armed himself with the information ahead of time. And that's some of the best advice we give people. Know the resources. Do your homework ahead of time, because the window of opportunity to support anyone with any addiction is very small. Because when that moment passes, they may not come back. So Stay educated, stay informed, and you're now advocates for the cause. Tell another person what you learned today. It might make a difference in someone's life.
Keith, how can you top that?
I can't. No, I'm glad to be here with you, Marcus and Dan. I do think the last thing to talk about, maybe a good way to end up on a gateway webinar, is to talk a little bit about recovery. And that it's important to note that when we talk about the hope and help available on the front side for when you have a problem, to know that that you can live a life successfully in the community in recovery. That there are supports available. It's tough, but it's doable. And we want to send a positive message to people that most people who get into gambling treatment, whether they go to a self-help group and they stick with self-help, whether they go to counseling like at Gateway, and better yet, in most cases, a combination of both, they can restore themselves to a healthy, sane way of living. And there should be no barriers for people in recovery to do anything. Members of our board of directors, for 50 years, we've had members in recovery on our board of directors, and, as presidents, as officers, as treasurer. We believe that someone in recovery from gambling addiction can not just restore themselves to a healthy way of living, but can, as Dan said, contribute actively to society. They can be, not everybody can be an outward facing ambassador for recovery, but even in your own personal situation, there's so much good that can come from taking that first step to call a helpline, to talk to someone like Dan said, and then finding those resources to help get you where you need to be, whether it's through Gateway, whether it's through self-help group, whether it's through self-exclusion like IGB provides. There's a lot of different pathways to success, but we know at the end of that all lies good and serene recovery. And it's got to be so much better than being in the agonizing hell of having a gambling problem and digging yourself in ever deeper and ever deeper. So there's a light at the end of that tunnel. And on Problem Gambling Awareness Month, it's really important to celebrate that recovery.
Absolutely. And that is a great way to end our conversation. And also just remind everyone that the services are there for in the beginning of your journey, in the middle of your journey, and for the rest of your journey, right? Because gambling and any kind of addiction is a chronic disease. And just like we don't blame grandma for having diabetes and she ate too much cake at the grandkids' party, we don't want to blame people for relapsing or having a challenge to not eat that piece of cake. So we want to be Gateway wants to be your partner for a long-term recovery, but all of us, I think, on this panel really are committed to this. And so, on behalf of everyone, I want to thank the three gentlemen that joined me today for our conversation. And again, we've put some resources there. This webinar will be available to share with others if you found it useful. And we hope that you have enjoyed our conversation and that you get the help that you need, or tell a friend. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.